The War Council chamber of Orion Prime was a monument to power and silence. The polished obsidian table stretched like a blade to the heart of the room, reflecting the cool glow of crystalline lights. Around it sat the leaders of the Galactic Empire, adorned in gleaming armor, jeweled robes, and the arrogance of species that believed they had outgrown war. Captain Elias Kale broke that silence with a sound like thunder. His scarred fist slammed against the table, the impact startling a few counselors whose soft hands had never gripped a weapon. His gaze swept across the assembled leaders, sharp and unyielding. You think humans fear war? His voice carried the harsh edge of someone who had bled too often to tolerate lies. We were born in it. We don't fear the dark. We are the dark. A murmur rippled through the chamber. Alien dignitaries exchanged uneasy glances, their smooth-scaled faces betraying fear and confusion. Grand Marshal Tverin Shirek, tall and reptilian, leaned back in his seat, claws tapping lightly against the table. His emerald eyes narrowed as he observed Kale with the kind of detached disdain usually reserved for insects. Your dramatics, human, are tiresome. The Vorks may be aggressive, but they are hardly the monsters you describe. Our fleets. Your fleets will burn, Kale cut in, his tone sharp as a knife. The Vorks don't fight wars like you. They don't line up and politely exchange fire until someone concedes. They consume. They drown you in numbers, bleed you until you have nothing left to fight with. You've never faced an enemy who doesn't care about survival. Humans have. We know how to break them, or die trying. A heavy silence fell again. The council chamber was not used to this kind of defiance. Kale didn't care. His patience had been stripped away years ago, burned out of him during the Terran pacification wars. The Empire's first attempt to tame humanity. He still remembered the cities turned to rubble, the screaming skies filled with fire, the desperate last stands of men and women who refused to kneel. The Empire won that war, but at a cost so high that even their historians whisper of it with unease. Kale straightened, his dark hair shadowing his eyes. You've built a galaxy of order and fear. You've erased chaos because it scares you. That's why you'll lose. War isn't something to fear. It's something to understand, to master. The Vorks don't fear it either. But unlike you, they live for it. One of the counselors, a delicate avian diplomat with jeweled feathers, leaned forward nervously. And what do you suggest, human? That we descend into barbarism? That we fight like savages? Kale's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Savages? No. Survivors. There's a difference. Tverin's claws clicked louder, irritation breaking through his composed facade. Enough of this posturing. Humans are reckless animals. We pacified your world in less than a decade. You think your kind knows war better than the Empire? Kale's eyes locked on Tverin, unflinching. You didn't pacify us. You buried us in bodies until you thought we were gone. But here I am. Here we are. You know why you keep humans alive? Because deep down, you know you need us. You don't understand war anymore. Not the real kind. Not the kind that claws at your throat and forces you to adapt or die. The Grand Marshal's jaw tightened. His authority had never been questioned in this chamber, yet this single human, scarred, plainclothed, and defiant, was unraveling the illusion of control. Kale didn't let up. He leaned forward, planting both hands on the obsidian table. The Vorks won't give you time to debate philosophy. They're already tearing through your border colonies. Every world they touch will be stripped clean, ships, cities, people. You can keep pretending your fleets are untouchable, or you can listen to me and start learning how to fight a war that doesn't care about your pride. The avian counselor shifted uneasily. And if we don't, then you'll fall, Kale said simply. And when you do, humanity will stand alone. We'll fight the Vorks ourselves. We've done it before. We'll do it again. But I won't waste time saving an empire too blind to save itself. His words were a challenge, heavy and final. A silence followed, heavier than before. Even Tverin seemed to falter, his calculating eyes narrowing as if weighing Kale's resolve against the unbroken record of imperial supremacy. The Vorks were dangerous. Yes, but no enemy had ever truly threatened the heart of the Empire. To admit fear now would mean admitting weakness. Finally, Tverin rose to his full height, towering over Kale. You speak as though humans are the masters of war, he said coldly. Perhaps we should test that theory. You claim to know how to fight these creatures. Fine, we'll give you a fleet, a small one. Show us your brilliance. But know this, human. If you fail, I will personally see your species wiped from every star we own. Kale's gaze hardened, but there was no hesitation. Then I guess I'd better not fail. The chamber erupted in arguments, counselors shouting, some demanding Kale's removal, others insisting the threat of the Vorix warranted a test of his claims. Kale ignored them all. His focus remained on Tverin, the predator who thought himself the apex of the galaxy. In Kale's mind, the war had already begun. Outside the council chamber, Kale stood on a balcony overlooking the endless sprawl of Orion Prime. The city-planet shimmered beneath the glow of a dozen suns, its towers stretching toward the heavens like arrogant spears. It was beautiful, in the way all empires were before they burned. A memory stirred his home, Earth, its cities blackened and broken during the Pacification War. He'd watched his people fight with nothing but desperation and fire in their hearts, and still they endured. The Empire had underestimated humanity then. So had every other species that thought war was something to fear. Kale exhaled slowly, the ghost of a smile tugging at his lips. You think you know war, he muttered to himself. You haven't seen anything yet. The Imperial Fleet Academy training yard gleamed under the pale light of Orion Prime's upper atmosphere. Marble white spires framed the square, their surfaces polished to perfection. Here, cadets from 100 species drilled in elegant formations, moving like clockwork under the guidance of hovering instructors. It was a place built to glorify precision and order. Captain Elias Kale watched the spectacle from a raised platform, arms crossed. The cadets marched as if they were in a parade, their synchronized steps echoing across the yard. He let them finish before turning to the instructor, a tall, insectoid officer named Chervak, whose thin mandibles clicked with irritation at Kale's presence. Pretty? Kale said flatly, but pretty doesn't win wars. Chervak bristled. These formations have been perfected over centuries. Our tactics are unmatched. Unmatched by who? Other parading fleets. Kale shot back. His voice carried enough bite to make nearby cadets pause mid-step. The Vorix won't stop to admire your perfect lines. They'll rip through them like paper. You're training them to lose beautifully. A hiss of protest rose from several officers, but Kale ignored them. He'd spent too long watching empires crumble under their own pride to waste breath on delicate egos. Later, inside a smaller tactical hall, Kale stood before a group of 20 officers, handpicked by Tverin to observe the humans' methods. They stared at him as though he were a dangerous animal barely contained by the room's walls. Kale dropped a stack of hollow charts onto the central console and brought up a tactical simulation of a Vorix assault. Swarms of red markers, Vorix strike pods, descended on a blue fleet in a perfect wedge formation. This, Kale began, pointing to blue wedge, is your standard Imperial defensive line. It's clean, it's efficient, and it's going to get you killed. He adjusted the simulation. In seconds, the red swarm overwhelmed the formation, cutting through it like fire through dry grass. The Vorix don't care about flanking patterns or neat firing arcs. They'll sacrifice 10,000 drones just to probe a weakness. They expect you to hold the line. So, don't. A scaled officer sneered. You suggest abandoning discipline? No, Kale said, meeting the officer's eyes with a hard stare. I suggest abandoning predictability. You need to think like them and like us. War isn't a chess game. It's a knife fight in the dark. You use every trick, every dirty move, every feint you can. The session turned tense fast. The officers struggled to grasp Kale's methods. He showed them how to break formation, scatter, and strike unpredictably, using smaller, faster craft as bait. He described tactics humans had perfected over centuries of desperate survival, ambushes, feigned retreats, asymmetric strikes. You call these tactics? Chervak hissed, mandibles clattering. This is chaos. Kale's jaw tightened. Chaos wins when you're outnumbered. I've fought battles where we had nothing but scrap metal and nerve. We made the enemy bleed because we weren't afraid to improvise. You lot think war is about perfection. It's about survival. A young officer, barely past cadet age, raised a cautious hand. You fought the Vorks before? Kale's gaze drifted for a moment, memories surfacing unbidden. No, but I fought something just as bad. The Empire. His voice dropped, softer but sharper. I watched my home burn while fleets like yours thought they'd break us with precision and force. We didn't break. We adapted. That's why I'm standing here, instead of buried under the rubble of my cities. By mid-session, Kale was done talking. He threw the officers into a live simulation. Their ships, hollow projections mapped onto a tactical arena, moved according to Imperial doctrine at first. Tight formations, perfect firing arcs. Kale slipped into the simulation as the enemy, commanding a swarm of simulated Vorks craft. Watch closely, he said. Within minutes, the officers' formation collapsed under his onslaught. Kale struck them from unpredictable angles, sacrificed decoys, and forced them into disarray. Their confidence shattered with every flashing red marker, signaling another loss. Again, Kale ordered. They restarted. Again, they failed. By the fourth run, sweat, or its alien equivalent, was beating on foreheads and scales. Frustration replaced arrogance. Kale finally stopped the simulation and leaned against the console. Good, he said quietly. Now you're angry. Hold on to that. Stop thinking about how war should be fought. Start thinking about how you'll win when everything falls apart. The session ended with officers murmuring among themselves, unsettled but thoughtful. Kale knew he'd planted a seed, but he also knew it was enough. As he left the hall, Grand Marshal Tverin stood waiting in the corridor, his massive frame blocking way like a wall of scaled muscle. His voice rumbled low, carrying barely restrained contempt. I heard your lesson. Do you believe chaos is the answer to everything human? Kale stopped a step away, looking up at the Marshal without fear. I believe fear is your enemy, not chaos. The Vorks smell fear. If your people can't shake it, they'll die before the first shot is fired. Tverin's claws tapped against his armored thigh. You're bold for someone whose species was nearly exterminated. Kale's lips twitched in a humorless half-smile. And yet here I am. Maybe boldness is why we're still here. The Grand Marshal's gaze hardened, but there was a glint of curiosity beneath the scorn. You'll have your fleet soon. One strike force. Prove yourself. Fail, and you won't get another chance. That night, Kale stood alone in a dim observation lounge overlooking the star-filled void beyond Orion Prime's atmosphere. The city's golden lights glimmered beneath him, but his mind was already far beyond this world. He called up the holographic schematic of the strike force he'd been promised. 20 ships, all Imperial make, sleek and fragile compared to blunt instruments he preferred. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. Kale muttered to himself, a habit from years spent talking to ghosts of fallen comrades. 20 ships. Not enough to stop the Vorks head-on. We'll need to bleed them. Make them guess. Make them afraid. A voice behind him startled him. It was a young officer from earlier, the one who dared to ask about the Vorks. Sir, she said hesitantly. Her skin shimmered faintly in the soft lights. Some aquatic species. Kale guessed. What is it? I wanted to say your tactics. They're strange, but maybe they'll work. I want to serve on your strike force. Kale studied her for a moment. She was young, untested, but her eyes carried something he hadn't seen in the others. Hunger, not for glory, but for survival. What's your name? Lieutenant Cyrie Venerable. Kale nodded. You've got grit, Lieutenant. You'll need it. Report to my crew tomorrow. We'll see if you're still standing after the first drill. As Cyrie left, Kale turned back to the stars. Beyond them, the Vorks were coming. The Empire's pride would crumble soon enough. But if Kale had anything to say about it, they would learn what humanity already knew. War belonged to those willing to embrace it, scars and all. The Imperial strike force drifted at the edge of the Orion sector. Its ships arranged in a neat crescent formation that made Kale grit his teeth. 20 vessels, polished and gleaming, looked more like ceremonial guardians than war machines. On the command deck of the flagship Resolute, Kale stood at the helm, arms clasped behind his back. The bridge officers move with mechanical precision, their every action silent and calculated. It was all wrong. Break formation, Cale ordered. Heads turned. Confusion rippled across the deck like a current. Commander Wren, a pale-skinned officer with silver eyes, stiffened. Captain, these are the standard fleet protocols. Deviating would be suicidal. Cale's voice cut through the silence. No. Stay in formation when the Vorks hit is suicidal. Break the line. Now! The hesitation was palpable. Cale's stare bore into them until, reluctantly, the helmsman began scattering the ships. The neat crescent dissolved into an uneven web, with smaller cruisers darting into flanking positions. Better, Cale muttered. War isn't parade. The Vorks arrived without warning. Sensors screamed as dozens of red blips tore out of the void, sleek, spiked vessels shaped like predators. They moved in a chaotic swarm, engines pulsing like a heartbeat. Within seconds, the blackness of space erupted with fire as their opening salvos slammed into the Imperial line. Shields at 60%, an officer shouted. Cale's hands tightened on the railing. Hold your fire. Let them come closer. What? Wren stared at him. We need to. Do it, Cale snapped. His voice left no room for argument. The Vork ships closed in, weaving unpredictably, probing for weak spots. Cale waited, eyes narrowed, feeling the rhythm of their attack. He could almost hear it, a pattern hidden within the chaos. Now, he said quietly, target their wings. Strike and fade. The Resolute fired, but not in a steady barrage. Instead, Cale directed the fleet to launch sudden, scattered bursts, each one aimed to disrupt the swarm's motion. The smaller Imperial frigates darted in and out like hunting wolves, cutting off Vork's flanks before retreating behind the heavier cruisers. It worked at first. They're adapting, Sairi Ven reported from the tactical console, her tone sharp. The Vork swarm tightened, its outer edges folding inward like jaws preparing to snap shut. Good, Cale said. Let them. We're going to bleed them for every move they make. The battle became a blur of fire and shrapnel. Space lit up in bursts of white and crimson, each explosion casting ghostly reflections across Cale's face. The Resolute shuddered as another volley slammed into its shields. Shields down to 30%. Cale barely flinched. Rotate shield frequency. Reroute power from the port cannons. We'll strike with starboard only. Keep them guessing. The officers obeyed, their earlier doubts muted by the brutal clarity of Cale's orders. For all his unorthodox methods, he was reading the battle like an open book. Midway through the engagement, a Vork's dreadship emerged from the swarm, a black leviathan, bristling with spines and glowing with the sickly green hue of its plasma cannons. It fired, cutting through one of the Imperial cruisers as if it were paper. Cale's jaw clenched. All ships, shift focus to that dreadship. Frigates, draw, fire, and scatter. We're going in close. Close. Wren looked at him like he'd gone mad. That thing will tear us apart. Cale's voice was ice. Not if we tear it first. The Resolute surged forward, its thrusters burning blue against the black canvas of space. Cale watched the dreadship's movements, every twitch of its massive frame, every shift in its weapon arrays. He didn't see a machine. He saw a predator, hungry, instinctive, but predictable if you knew where to look. Helm, bring us under its firing line. Target the joint on its dorsal spine. Then, line up a torpedo strike. Sairi's fingers flew across the controls. Locked. Fire. The torpedo streaked out, trailing fire. It struck the dreadship's spine with a blast that shook the stars. Armor peeled away like flesh under a blade. The beast roared, if the vibrations tearing through the void could be called a roar. But victory came with blood. A Vork skirmisher broke past the flanking ships and slammed a barrage into the Resolute's port side. Alarms blared. Cale's ears rang as sparks burst across the bridge. A crewman crumpled to the floor, blood pooling beneath him. Damage control. Cale barked. He knelt, gripping the crewman's shoulder briefly. The soldier's wide eyes reflected Cale's own fury. He stood, voice steady. We hold this line. We don't give them an inch. Hit them with everything we have. For the next 30 minutes, the battle was a brutal dance. Kale abandoned every trace of Imperial doctrine, commanding ships to feint retreat and strike from unexpected vectors. He even ordered a pair of frigates to self-destruct when surrounded, taking half a dozen Vorik ships with him. By the time the dreadship finally cracked apart in a blaze of white fire, silence filled the bridge, shocked, disbelieving silence. The Vorik swarm, leaderless and bleeding, scattered into the void. Kale exhaled slowly, his muscles aching as if he'd fought the battle with his own hands. "Status?" he asked. "6 ships lost," Sayuri reported quietly. "But we won." Her voice carried a note of wonder. "We actually won." Kale didn't smile. Victory was never something to celebrate, only survive. He looked out at the wreckage floating in the black sea of space. "We're not done." This was only their first wave. The Voriks will be back, and stronger. Hours later, as damaged crews worked tirelessly, a private message came through from Orion Prime. It was Tverin. The Grand Marshal's face appeared on the holoscreen, his expression carved from stone. "So, the humans' chaos is mere after all," Tverin said, his tone laced with both grudging respect and irritation. Kale didn't rise to the bait. "We got lucky. Next time, luck won't save us. We need better weapons, faster ships, and commanders willing to think like predators, not statues." Tverin's eyes narrowed. "Careful, Captain. Pride keeps empires strong." "No," Kale said firmly. "Adaptation keeps them alive." The transmission cut. In the quiet that followed, Kale leaned against the console, staring at the endless stars beyond the viewport. His crew moved around him. Alien officers who hours ago had doubted him but now followed without question. Sayuri approached, her expression guarded. "You fought like you'd done this 100 times, she said softly. Kale's gaze remained fixed on the stars. "More times than I'd like to remember." He turned, meeting her eyes. "Get some rest, Lieutenant. Tomorrow, we start preparing for the next one. Because this war, it's only getting started." The Vorik's hive ship loomed like a wound in space, an obsidian sphere covered in pulsating crimson veins, each one glowing faintly as if alive. The strike force drifted in its shadow, hidden by the wreckage of a shattered moon. Kale stood on the Resolute's command deck, eyes fixed on the alien monstrosity. He had seen cities burn and planets crack, but nothing like this. "It's not a ship," Sayuri whispered from the tactical console. "It's a nest." Kale nodded, jaw tight. "And if we don't burn it now, it'll spit out 1,000 more." The plan was madness, even by his standards. Imperial doctrine would have called for a siege fleet of 100 ships and months of careful bombardment. Kale had 20 battered vessels, dwindling ammunition, and no time. He knew the Voriks would not wait for the Empire to find its courage. "Commander Wren," Kale said, voice sharp, "prep all strike craft. We hit them from the inside." Wren turned to him, disbelief plain in his silver eyes. "Inside? That thing is a fortress. Even if we breach the hull, we'll be slaughtered." Kale's gaze was iron. "We've got one chance to cripple their hive. Their armor's too thick for a frontal assault, but their guts? Soft. We go in fast, plant charges at their core, and get out before it blows." Wren hesitated, but the raw certainty in Kale's voice left no room for argument. Minutes later, the strike force launched its fighters. Kale took the lead in a battered gunship, his hands steady on the controls. The black void ahead twisted with motion, Vorik's drones spilling from the hive like a swarm of locusts. "All ships break pattern," Kale ordered. "Keep them guessing. Don't fight to win, fight to distract." The fighters darted in wild arcs, drawing the swarm away. Kale's gunship punched through a gap in the chaos, engine screaming. Sayuri's voice crackled through the comms from the second lead ship. "We're through the outer screen. Hull breach point in 90 seconds. "Stay tight," Kale replied. His eyes never left the glowing veins of the hive ship as it grew larger, filling the viewport like a living nightmare. The first impact rattled the gunship. Vorik's weapons lashed out from the hive surface, acidic plasma that burned like liquid fire. One of the escort fighters vanished in a burst of white heat. "Fighter 3 down," Sayuri reported, her voice clipped but steady. Kale's knuckles whitened around the controls. "Keep pushing." They can't stop all of us. The breach came like tearing flesh. The gunship's cannons roared, punching through a thinner patch of the hive's exterior. The hull peeled apart, revealing a cavernous interior glowing with sickly organic light. Cale didn't slow. "Inside," he barked. "Plant charges on every power node we see. We're not here to make it pretty." The interior of the hive ship was worse than Cale imagined. It felt alive. The walls pulsed faintly, as if the ship itself were breathing. Metallic structures jutted out like bones, wrapped in wet, black sinew. "Are we inside a ship or an organism?" Cyree muttered. "Doesn't matter," Cale said. "We kill it the same way." The strike team disembarked, boots sinking slightly into the strange, spongy floor. They carried packs of high-yield explosives, each one enough to gut a cruiser. Cale led the way through winding tunnels, his rifle raised, senses on edge. The first ambush came fast. Vorax warriors, hulking, insectoid brutes with blades for limbs, erupted from the walls with shriek. Cale fired point-blank, his rifle spitting hot bursts that ripped through chitin and flesh. "Keep moving," he roared as the team engaged. "Plant the charges. I'll hold them off." Cyree stayed at his side, moving with sharp precision. "2 nodes rigged," she shouted over the gunfire. 3 more, then we're out." The tunnels turned into a slaughterhouse. Cale fought like a man possessed, his every motion honed by years of survival. He could feel the weight of every second pressing against him. If they hesitated, they'd be buried alive in this nightmare. A Vorax brute lunged at Cyree from the shadows. Cale tackled it, driving his blade into its throat. Black ichor splattered across his armor. "Keep your head, Lieutenant." She nodded, breath ragged but eyes blazing with determination. When the last charge was set, Cale keyed his comm. "All units, pull back to the ships. Detonation in 5 minutes." The retreat was chaos. Vorax drones flooded the tunnels, their screeches echoing like metal on bone. Cale's team fought through them, step by step, rifles running hot and knives flashing in close quarters. Cyree stumbled but kept moving, Cale covering her with precise bursts. He didn't look back at the carnage. They either made it out or they didn't. The gunship bay was a storm of movement when they returned. Rin's voice crackled through the comms. "Captain, the swarm is tightening. We're boxing." "Not for long," Cale growled, leaping into the pilot's seat. "Punch a hole and be ready to run." The Resolute's guns lit up the void as Cale's team launched back into space. The hive ship shuddered violently, its glowing veins flickering as the charges began to detonate deep inside its core. The explosion was a silent starburst, a bloom of white and red light that consumed the hive from within. Chunks of blackened armor spun away, burning as they tumbled. The Vorax swarm scattered, some vessels caught in the blast, others fleeing like wounded predators. Cheers erupted on the comms. Cyree's voice cracked with exhilaration. "Direct hit! We did it!" Cale allowed himself a single nod, nothing more. "Don't celebrate yet. Plot a course out of this sector, before they regroup." Hours later, the strike force limped back toward Imperial space, battered but alive. Cale stood on the bridge of the Resolute, silent as reports came in. For ships lost, dozens of casualties, but the hive was gone. Then came the transmission. Tveranes' holographic form materialized in front of Cale, his expression unreadable. "So the human gambled and it paid off," the Grand Marshal said. "But at what cost?" "Reckless tactics and needless losses. This is not how the Empire fights." Cale's jaw tightened. "The Empire doesn't fight. It hides behind its own pride. We won today because we stopped pretending war is clean. You can't fight the Vorax with parades and formations. You need teeth." Tveranes' eyes narrowed, his voice cold. "Careful, Captain. You speak as though you're indispensable." Cale stepped closer to the hologram, his voice low but sharp. "I'm not indispensable, but my species knows how to survive. Can you say the same about yours?" The silence that followed was heavy enough to choke on. Later, Cale stood alone in the crew quarters, stripping the blood and ichor from his armor. Cyree entered quietly, her face drawn but resolute. "You were right," she said. "If we'd fought their way, we'd all be dead." Cale didn't look up. You want to survive, Lieutenant? Then never fight the way they expect you to. Her nod was small but certain. I won't forget. Cale paused, staring into mirror. His reflection was a stranger, a scarred soldier in a war no one else understood. He muttered under his breath, almost to himself, this was just the beginning. The Vork's armada emerged from a void like a living tide. Hundreds of ships, their jagged silhouettes blotting out the stars. They regrouped faster than Cale predicted. Stronger, hungrier, driven by the loss of the hive ship. The Resolute sat at the heart of a hastily assembled Imperial fleet, its 20 battered vessels now reinforced by another 40 from Orion Prime. It wasn't enough. Cale knew at the moment he saw the swarm spread across the void, curling like claws around their position. On the bridge, tension was a physical weight. Officers spoke in clipped whispers, fingers dancing over controls, as though any louder sound might provoke the coming storm. Cale stood at the center, his boots anchored to the deck like roots. We can't hold this line, Commander Wren said, his voice tight. Even with reinforcements, they'll tear through us. Then we don't hold, Cale replied. His gaze stayed fixed on the tactical display, red markers swarming against the scattered blue of the fleet. We strike where they don't expect. One shot to the throat. The comms flare was static before Tveranes' voice filled the room. Captain Cale, the fleet awaits your plan. Speak now, or I'll take command myself. Cale didn't flinch. You want my plan? Listen carefully. We're not going to meet them head-on. We cut through the center of their swarm, burn a path straight to their command node. We take out the brain, and the body dies. Tveranes' reptilian eyes narrowed on the hollow screen. You'd risk everything on a reckless charge? Cale's tone was flint. It's not reckless. It's survival. You've seen what happens when we stand still. They consume us piece by piece. We punch through, or we die where we sit. Your choice. A silence stretched long enough for Cale to hear his own heartbeat. Then, reluctantly, Tveranes said, do it. Cale turned to his crew. All ships form a spearhead. Frigates at the tip, heavy cruisers behind. When I give the signal, we break formation into chaos, scatter, hit them from all sides, then regroup for the final push. Cyree then stood at his side, her jaw set. And if we don't find their command ship? Cale looked at her, his expression hard but steady. Then we keep hitting until we're out of ammo or out of blood. Either way, they'll know we were here. The fleet surged forward. Engines flared, cutting sharp lines of light against the darkness. The Vorik swarm moved to meet them, a wall of jagged ships closing like jaws. Now! Cale roared. The Imperial spearhead fractured, scattering into unpredictable fragments. Ships dove and rolled, firing in bursts, cutting through the swarm in erratic patterns that confused the Vork's coordination. Cale's tactics, once dismissed as madness, now spread across the fleet like wildfire. Frigate 7, flank left, draw them off. Cale barked. Cruisers, hit their rear lines, make them bleed. The black void became a maelstrom of fire and wreckage. Cale's gunship wove through it, the Resolute at the center of his web. Contact! Cyree's voice rang out. Large Vorik signature. This has to be their command ship. Cale's eyes narrowed at the massive shape emerging from the chaos. It was unlike the hive they destroyed. Sleeker, armored like a predator built to survive anything. All ships focus fire. Cale ordered. We bring it down or we die trying. The Resolute shook violently as plasma fire hammered its shields. Shields at 40%. Wren shouted, hold course. Cale gritted his teeth. Then, line up a torpedo spread. Aim for the joint sections on its hull. Those are weak points. They're heavily shielded. Then burn through them. Double power to forward batteries. The first volley slammed into the Vorik's command ship, peeling chunks of armor. Black smoke and fire bled into the void, but the creature machine did not stop. Suddenly, a Vorik's carrier broke past a flank and smashed into an Imperial cruiser. The explosion lit the void like a second sun. Cale didn't look away. Push forward. Don't stop for anything. The battle collapsed into brutal close-range combat. Cale's fleet swarmed the command ship, their weapons pounding relentlessly. The Vorks responded with deadly precision. Waves of drones latching onto hulls, cutting through armor like knives through flesh. Cyrie's voice cut through the chaos. We can't keep this up. We're losing ships faster than they are. Kale's eyes burned with grim fire. Then we take it down now. Ramming protocol. Rin spun toward him. Horror etched on his face. Ramming? That's suicide. Kale's voice was ice. Not for all of us. Just for me. He keyed the fleet-wide channel. All units, fall back to defensive positions. The Resolute will finish this. Cyrie grabbed his arm. You can't. I can, Kale said softly. This is what humans do when the odds are impossible. We fight anyway. The Resolute charged forward alone, engines burning hotter than they'd ever been pushed. The Vork's command ship turned its weapons on them, but Kale weaved through the fire, every maneuver precise and brutal. Then, open every missile bay we've got, he ordered. Captain, if we fire them all, we won't have enough power to... Do it. The missiles launched in a blinding wave, punching through the command ship's weakened shields. The explosions ripped open at hull, exposing the glowing heart of the beast, an energy core pulsing with malignant light. Kale locked onto it, hands steady on the controls. This is for every city they burned, he muttered. At the last second, Cyrie's voice cracked over the comm. Kale, wait. We can remote detonate from here. Kale hesitated, then gave a sharp nod. Do it. The Resolute veered off, skimming the surface of the Vork's ship as the last volley of missiles tore into its core. The detonation was like the birth of a star, white fire expanding outward, consuming everything. The Vork swarm faltered, their formations collapsing into chaos as command links severed. The silence that followed was deafening. Vork's ships retreating, Rin reported, disbelief heavy in his voice. Kale stood motionless for a moment, then exhaled. Signal the fleet. It's over. Hours later, the survivors gathered on the bridge. Cyrie approached Kale, her armor scorched but her eyes bright. You did it, she said quietly. We did it, Kale corrected. His gaze swept over the wreckage drifting in space. This victory cost us, but it showed them something they'll never forget. Tveranes's voice came over the comm, begrudging and heavy. Perhaps humans do not fear war. Perhaps you thrive in it. Kale didn't answer. He stared out into the void, the stars reflecting in his dark eyes. We don't thrive in war, he murmured. We just refuse to lose. As the fleet limped home, Kale stood alone at the viewport, hands clasped behind his back. The Vorks weren't gone. They'd returned, stronger, smarter. But the Empire had learned a lesson written in blood and fire. And Kale? He knew this was only the beginning.